Welcome back to the V.T.P. as we move on in time to the era of the Nintendo Game Boy Advance and the notable games that are made part of it.
Generation 3 was truly a new era for the Pokémon franchise, as it was not intended to actually happen as noted before. But because the franchise was proving to be so popular, much more than Game Freak could have ever imagined, it was decided that the series would continue, but with a twist. The next entries to the series would be featured on the Game Boy Advance, entirely new hardware that did leave some players disappointed, as the change in hardware at the time meant that the Pokémon they had raised and played with in the previous generations could not be brought over to the new games. However, this was a small price to pay for everything more that was provided, as not only did the Generation 3 games provide much needed updates to the way the games worked, but provided a whole new region to explore in the form of the Hoenn region and Ouray even among others, as well as new evil organizations to fight in the form of Team Aqua and Magma, not to mention others like Cypher and spin-off titles, as well as plenty of new Pokémon to capture and many new exciting features that would go on to help amplify the success of the previous generations and pave the way for what Pokémon games have become today. Contests and Pokeblocks. Pokemon contests were the first way in which players of the main series games had the chance to use their Pokemon for more than just battling in order to prove themselves to be knowledgeable on how to make the most of the creatures in and out of friendly competition. Instead of battling others to prove who is the best, with Pokemon contests, players could groom and increase the aesthetic appeal of their Pokemon and their moves in order to make for a dazzling show that could be won not through power, but technique and skill and the capacity to make the most of any Pokemon and the moveset that did require them to be powerful to be true winners. With contests, players could use berries in order to craft Pokeblocks from blending berries that could raise one or more 5 stats to their Pokemon that reflected their appearance and their moves and not their power, namely cute, smart, cool, tough, and beauty, and from there, they could then use their Pokemon's moves to show off and dazzle judges into giving them hearts as a way to show how much of a showstopper they could be in those categories. The reward for these contests were ribbons that could be proudly displayed with the Pokemon that won these contests and the different difficulty grades, and helped to make even the weakest of Pokemon into winners worthy of respect and praise. These contests evolved over time to include different acts and aesthetic additions to a Pokemon's appearance as they transformed past Generation 3 into Generation 4, where they truly hit the peak of their popularity. However, for as grand as these contests were, it seems that they stopped being seen as a needed priority after Generation 4, as they were replaced with a much simpler and less lucrative Pokemon musical in Generation 5, before that too was phased out, possibly in order to give greater emphasis to the New World syndrome that classified Generation 5 so strongly at the onset of its debut. Secret Bases. While not a huge hallmark to some, Secret Bases were a unique addition to the gameplay of Generation 3 that allowed players to use a Pokemon with the move's secret power to build hidden bases that could be used for a bit of player customization and even some friendly battles with friends in the initial days of its use. These bases were converted into Super Secret Bases in the Generation 3 remakes and had a large variety of added features, with options to battle others for experience and money, resurrecting fossils, and much more. Plus, being able to put in furniture and dolls you purchase or otherwise acquire in your journeys was a major plus for many in making the bases feel like their own special place. With Generation 4 of these bases moved to the underground, where traps and flag captures became a main feature, and in the remakes of that generation, they could even be filled with special statues to attract certain types of Pokemon within the ground underground's more spacious locations. While a fine addition to be sure, there wasn't a huge impact on the way the games played with the addition of this feature, so it didn't really have the chance to perpetuate into further generations outside of remakes, where it could have more heavily influenced future games. Trainer Tower and Trainer Hill. Trainer Tower and Trainer Hill served essentially the same purpose in the respective games of Fire Red and Leaf Green and Emerald, and while they might seem just like any other battle facility, they function quite differently. With these facilities, the goal was to get through the trainers present on the multiple floors of the structure and get to the top of the facility as quickly as possible in order to acquire a prize, whose form and value were dependent on how fast one could actually battle their way to the roof. While they might have been something of some minor fun and essential to collecting some rare items, these gimmick facilities didn't end up lasting all that long, as they were phased out before the end of their debut generation. Battle Tents. These 3 facilities were scattered across the Hoenn region in Emerald, and served to give trainers a way to practice their skills in 3 different types of challenges that were distinct from those present in other parts of the main campaign in Emerald. These tents, however, were little more than practice areas for the battle frontier, taking the place of contest halls, as in Emerald, all contests are held within the contest hall in Lilycomb City, and thus did not make any appearance outside of Emerald. Battle Frontier. While competitive Pokemon battling has been a part of the franchise for a long time before the advent of Pokemon Emerald, there was never really any serious in-game incentive to make the strongest team possible for the casual player. However, that all changed dramatically with the debut of the Battle Frontier in Pokemon Emerald. While the Battle Tower had served as a slight in-game focus for those looking to test the skills of Pokemon, there was never really anything more to it aside from being a challenge. In the Battle Frontier, however, there are multiple facilities present that can test the capabilities of trainers to the utmost in a variety of different ways, some more conventional than others. Here, the Battle Tower was only but one type of challenge, and it really gave players something vast and complex to sink their time and teeth into. It was unlikely that a single team would ever be able to perform well in all formats, so trainers had to raise teams carefully in order to maximize their chances of success in any facility, and only the most dedicated of players would ever be able to complete and conquer the entire complex. While this system did not make a reappearance in the first set of Generation 4 games, it was eventually reproduced with new characters and facilities both in Pokemon Platinum and Heart Gold and Soul Silver. However, after Generation 4, the Battle Frontier concept as a whole was dropped, and while Battle Tower-like facilities continued to crop up over time in subsequent generations, the sort of sprawling complex that defined Emerald and many of the Generation 4 games never came back, and this obviously has angered many fans. Recently, it was made known that the reason for its abandonment really came down to time and sales figures. With so many different games out there to grab the attention of potential players now, it was decided that players likely were not going to play the games as long as they might have before, and thus it was more cost-effective to limit the scope of these facilities in future titles. Moreover, the fan community has really sprung up strong online with personal challenges that are created not by the games but by players themselves, with challenges like Nuzlocke in particular becoming extremely popular. These fan-made challenges help to make the Pokemon adventure one that they can shape both the pathway and the difficulty of in a playthrough. So with players creating their own content on the note, it makes sense that this sadly beloved feature of older generations is unlikely to ever make a full return, or at least never to the extent to which it once existed. Pokénav. The Pokénav was a spiritual successor of the Pokégear from Generation 2, and features similar functions and traits that help define it as a vital tool for player usage. Much as with its predecessor, this device allows players to check a map on it, but also serves as a way of checking the condition of a Pokémon as part of Pokémon contests, as well as the ribbons, both features new to Generation 3, and could even keep track of other trainers through the match call system, which would be expanded in Generation 3 from the phone system in the previous generation to allow for a greater degree of trainer versatility when it comes to rematching NPCs. This would further be improved upon with the Generation 3 remakes, where it became the Pokénav Plus, which additionally featured a Pokemon search function, as well as a tracking system for super secret bases and planted berries, not to mention the DexNav, PlayNav, and BuzzNav functions for hunting for rare Pokemon, the player's search system functions, and viewing educational television, respectively. While highly useful, it too was tied directly to the generation of its origin, and thus did not make a comeback in subsequent generations, eventually being replaced with a Poketech. E-Reader. The e-reader was a device that did get a lot of time in action outside of Japan, and it's a shame as the device really had the capacity to make games more interesting for players of all types. In essence, this device could be combined with cards and certain compatible games in order to add things to a given game to enhance the playing experience. This even goes for Pokemon, as compatible cards could be used to add new trainers to fight in the game, rare Pokemon to encounter and capture, and even rare and unique items that normally would be inaccessible in the games. However, while a unique concept and feature, the device never really took off, and thus all of its functionality in the franchise was short-lived and eventually forgotten before Generation 4. Nature's EVs and IVs. Prior to Generation 3, the stat system for Pokemon was based on two factors, the DV values, which ranged from 0 to 15, and stat experience, which was calculated by adding the base stats of an opposing Pokemon to an opponent's stat experience counter when defeated. And while the system worked to some degree, it could be busted to make Pokemon extremely powerful and difficult to defeat. Plus, the system itself was sort of buggy and was stuck with the limitations of the hardware present at that time. In order to rectify this, when Generation 3 debuted, the stat system was completely overhauled into the three-part stat system that currently exists as the norm. First, there are IVs or individual values, which range from 0 to 31 and basically dictate how high a stat value can possibly get on a Pokemon. They are with a Pokemon permanently and do not change unless under the effects of hyper training, and even then only indirectly. Second, there are EVs or effort values, which are earned by defeating Pokemon. Unlike stat experience, however, a single stat can only have up to 252 EVs assigned to it, and only a total of 510 EVs can be earned on any one Pokemon to help balance them out and make it fair for anyone that is challenging them. Thirdly and lastly, this generation introduced the Nature system, which would cause one of the stats to have a 10% boost to it, while another stat would feature a 10% reduction to it at the same time, sometimes even the same stat, which could result in neutral effects on the stats of a given Pokemon. Not only has the system proven to be much more consistent in making battles fun and engaging, but more importantly, it can allow for specialization and new strategies that take advantage of these changes and help to elevate the level of effort and strategy needed to win a fight, and for those reasons alone, it has proven to be a strong standard to set combat and training by. Ribbons. Ribbons were introduced in Generation 3 as a way of marking Pokemon for their distinctive services throughout the time that players spend using them in-game. These objects do not have any real effect, but they can be seen on the status screens of Pokemon, and as of Generation 8, can even be equipped to Pokemon in order to show a special message of some sort when they are released into battle. These objects serve no distinction other than showing the sorts of trials and tribulations that a player's Pokemon has gone through over the course of a long journey, or might show that they came from some sort of special event in the past that makes their origins unique. Though a simple feature at best, they've helped to make tasks other than battling something to be proud of, happily and proudly displayed with their attached Pokemon to show what really makes them special compared to others of their own species in the wild or in the possession of other trainers, making their inclusion in subsequent generations more than understandable, especially given that ribbons carry over into other games when Pokemon are transferred. Wireless Adapter. Prior to the release of Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, any training or special events would require the use of a physical link cable in order for the process to be completed, and this could be a problem as the cables were known to sometimes be rather finicky if not used correctly. However, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green came with a new advancement in technology that would work to put all of that in the past: the wireless adapter for the Game Boy Advance. While the device itself seems a bit clunky in retrospect, for the first time ever, players could actually transfer Pokemon between different parties using it without having to be directly connected to their partner on the other side of the trade. Although the initial range wasn't exactly that great, it was a huge deal as it meant that trades could happen a lot more smoothly and could be relied upon more by casual players without the need to buy link cables to experiment with. This would serve as the predecessor for the wireless technology that is now standard for the series and technology as a whole, so while the physical objects themselves were eventually phased out, their base technologies would allow us for trading as it is today, and the games would not be the same without this breakthrough advancement in the series. Double battles. For the first two generations of the series, battles were restricted to only being one-on-one in every format, with only a single Pokemon on each side of the playing field. However, in order to strongly symbolize the two aspects of the world of water and land in the Hoenn region, Generation 3 saw the introduction of the double battle format, which had far greater, long-reaching effects on battling than ever seen before. In this battle format, as one might imagine, players use two Pokemon at once to face an equal number of Pokemon on the opposing side of the field. While Pokemon on each side can be targeted freely in a double battle, there are some modifications made to moves that can allow them to attack and hit multiple targets at once at the cost of some power in the case of attacking moves. Moreover, there are some moves that really only work well in this specific format, thus allowing for greater strategy to be developed to overcome the offensive assaults of other opponents. Because each Pokemon needs to rely on its partner to make the most of their combat attributes, this by design means that trainers must keep in mind how the Pokemon work with each other and balance out their individual traits, thus requiring much more extensive preparation in order to come out on top. The fact that this battle format has become the official format for VGC professional fighting more than demonstrates its effectiveness as the de facto battle style for competitive play, and in turn is a format so embraced by the series now that it is unlikely to ever lose its prominence in the future. Multi-battles. Multi-battles are a product of Generation 3 and serve as a complement to double battles in that they are still double battles at their core. The difference here is that these battles involve the player character battling alongside another player or an NPC in the games, and thus means that only one of the player's Pokemon is out in the field, the other slot being taken up by their ally. This simple change really doesn't fundamentally alter the way that these double battles are handled otherwise, and they still pop up today, and turn existing as just a secondary form of double battles that works well on its own without a need for further detail and experimentation. Berry planting. While berries were introduced as held items within Generation 2, It wasn't until the entire system and types of berries available for players was radically changed in Generation 3 that it truly became a prominent part of the series. This comes down to the fact that all known berry types were removed from the games after Generation 2 and replaced with a catalog of different berry types that had varying effects, could actually be used to make Pokeblocks, and, most importantly of all, could actually be planted and grown. The reason why this was a big deal was that, prior to this mechanic being introduced, you could only get one berry of a certain type per day from a tree. However, in Generation 3, berries can be planted in patches of soil and watered over varying lengths of time to make multiple berries at once. And given the types of berries made available were much wider in their scope and function than they ever were before, it made sense for berry planting and growing to be an essential tool for getting as many of these items as possible. Given how they would only increase in number and variety as time went on, the multi-purpose benefits of these items and this new growth system more than helped make them a key factor in making the best equipped Pokemon possible if given a berry having an effect that can prove to be highly beneficial in and out of battle, even if the process by which the berries are obtained differs between generations. Field Weather. While weather was officially introduced in the series in Generation 2 through the sunny day and rain dance techniques, it wasn't until Generation 3 that weather on the field became a true feature in the series. In essence, this meant that, under certain conditions, different outdoor locations could feature actual weather that could impact any Pokemon battles that took place outside when exposed to said weather. This could range from rain and intense sunlight to other conditions like snow and hail and sandstorms, with some locations even having permanent weather effects locked into them that would always have to be accounted for by players. This helps to create environments that are not only more distinct from other locations, but also provides a level of challenge that players either have to find a way to work around or embrace, and the fact that it makes sense to exist from a real-world perspective means that these sorts of effects have carried over since the debut in Generation 3, and have even become extremely useful in affecting what Pokemon might spawn in an area as seen in Sword and Shield, so it is unlikely that field weather effects are going to be leaving this series for any significant reason in the future. Alternative Gym Leaders, Elite Four, and Champions. While it is usually the standard that major opponents, namely Gym Leaders, Elite Four members, and Champions, can stay mostly the same through different games within generations, in some cases, these trainers might not appear in the same role, if any at all, in different games within a generation. As an example, looking at Emerald where it all started, the game's final gym leader for Ruby and Sapphire, Wallace, is actually the champion in Emerald, and a different trainer altogether, his mentor Juan, takes the place of him as the last gym leader in the Hoenn region. This helps to shake things up a bit and provides new battling experiences for players, so it's not just the same opponents in every case when playing through a region more than once. Not all generations have featured this kind of alteration, but it can prove to be of unique importance in some cases, such as the shake-up between Black and White and Black 2 and White 2 being a consequence of story events that have occurred between those two sets of games in Generation 5. This has been repeated even as recently as Generation 8 in the Galar region, with version-exclusive gym leaders, and given that it helps to provide incentive for players to buy new games within a generation even if they have older ones, it is safe to say that this and more dynamic representation of player-NPC interactions is likely something that will continue to make subsequent generations feel more interesting and varied into the future. New Villains. The first two generations of Pokemon featured Team Rocket as the primary antagonist in their associated games, but starting in Generation 3 with Ruby and Sapphire, players were introduced to two entirely new teams of enemies, Teams Magma and Aqua. These two teams wished to use the respective power of Groudon and Kyogre to shape the world into one they saw fit as belonging to the people and wild Pokemon of the world, and will stop at nothing to accomplish their goals, regardless of the harm that it could do to others. This breakaway from past generations allows for the crafting of more unique stories that do not have to always tie together, and thus enable the antagonists of any game to stand on their own with unique ambitions and goals, and in turn provide players with unique incentives to play through the games to stop the dastardly deeds of these antagonists. And with their frequent connection to legendary Pokemon of any game, it raises the stakes even higher by pitting players against an organization that will not back down when it comes to pursuing their goals. While the villains of the series go back and forth on how evil they truly are, it is safe to say that this has allowed for villains to become part of the core dynamic in the main stories of any of the games in the series beyond Generation 2, and thus is a vital tool in story and world building that is simply too crucial today to ever be removed from use. Abilities. With the advent of items already established in the series by now, Generation 3 added one more attribute to Pokemon that's become a series staple in terms of its applications in and out of battle, and that would be abilities. While they're not incredibly complex, abilities basically grant Pokemon a special attribute or skill that can normally never be removed without some sort of special technique or other ability to cancel them out. While not every species has a truly unique ability, all have at least one ability, some 2 or more, and there's a great variety to them, each adding a new layer of complexity to battles and the playing experience in general that goes beyond just the moves, stats, and types of a Pokémon and even their held items. Abilities can sometimes make or break a Pokémon and help to give even the weakest of Pokémon some sort of special attribute to help them stand up to larger threats. And given how simple they are to take note of in battle, it is a layer of complexity that comes with few drawbacks for most Pokémon, and is thus a critical component to strategizing that is likely to never be totally removed from the main series games. Shadow Pokémon. While they were not intended to be a part of the mainline series, Pokémon Colosseum and Pokémon XD Gale of Darkness did introduce a unique form of Pokémon known as Shadow Pokémon that had a brief but strong shine in the spotlight in Generation 3. These creatures usually look about the same as other Pokémon, but they are the result of the doors to a Pokémon's heart being shut artificially, transforming them into monsters that will gladly attack humans and Pokémon alike with little issue, and the way that they fight is notably different. Originally, they only had access to a single Shadow attack, Shadow Rush, but in XD Gale of Darkness, a large number of Shadow moves were introduced into the equation. In essence, these moves normally deal super effective damage to any Pokémon they hit, and are only resisted by other Shadow Pokémon. The effects and power of these moves can make them a terror to deal with, and this is even made even worse by Shadow Pokémon and the tendency to enter a sort of hyper mode when they become locked into using their Shadow moves and can hurt themselves in certain situations. Thankfully, it is possible to purify these creatures with items and using them in battle, and when purified, they can often get access to moves that they are normally unable to learn otherwise. While these sorts of Pokémon were not seen outside these two games for a very long time, Pokémon Go actually brought the concept back in a modified sense, with the effects of being a Shadow Pokémon mainly just changing their combat points and the moves they can access before purification. But the fact that it was brought back at all shows the unique place these Pokémon have in this series, and the dedication of fans latching onto the idea and likely inspiring Niantic to make it a feature in Pokémon Go nearly 5 generations after they were last seen in action. Remakes. While the main series games have always been at the forefront of introducing new Pokémon and locations in the franchise, technology can sometimes limit what can and cannot be transferred in to bring in the favorite Pokémon of many players, and in Generation 3, this was especially the case because of the hardware split that made it impossible for the first 2 generations to connect with Generation 3. In order to begin to rectify this, Generation 3 saw the first true remakes in the franchise's history, Fire Red and Leaf Green, meant to be remakes of the original Red and Green games. These games allowed players to go back to the Kanto region and relive the story and journey of the original Generation 1 games, both updated mechanics for the time and new areas added on to make it possible to truly complete the National Dex in its entirety. Not only does the creation of remakes in general help to cross barriers that may be present because of hardware limitations, but it also allows for new content to be added in to flesh out the games and make the adventures feel grander than ever before, like the inclusion of the Sevi Islands in the Generation 1 remakes. With nostalgia and the capacity to get access to older Pokémon that are otherwise hard to obtain in new games, it goes without saying that remakes have always been a popular choice for both players and game developers alike, and in turn are likely to reoccur as time goes on to exploit the wallets of gamers, for the right reasons mainly, and help to keep even older generations fresh and connected to more modern games in the franchise.
With Generation 3 out of the way, next up is a whole new world of hardware and possibilities as we move on to the next part of the V.T.P. Thank you for watching this video. It brings me great joy to be able to speak to you all in the world each and every time we meet like this, to explore the many different facets of both the world of Pokemon as we know it, and the world as we live it, through every adventure we have with Pokemon by our side. If you'd like to, please subscribe, ring the bell and all that jazz, to keep yourself updated on content uploads and other materials of the like. You can also follow me on Twitter if you'd like to know right away when something new is uploaded, and my written works, from which most of this is based on, can be found on DeviantArt. Links to both can be found in the description down below. Remember that the world of Pokemon is a place full of wonder and mystery, and you never know what to expect. So, stay vigilant, keep watch, and always be prepared for the unexpected. Until next time, trainers and friends of all sorts, have a wonderful time.